My Gavan and Melanine, and well met indeed. I'm Arachir Galadirthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome to a faction overview video for Divide and Conquer version 4.5 Rhûn. Not to be pronounced run, but it can be if you want. I'm not going to tell you not to. So Rhûn, starting away in the east. Starting size then. Rhûn, of course, were changed some time ago, and we'll discuss that in this video, but you only start with one region. Mistrand, your capital. Gathod is the region name. The starting size of your army. In your capital, you find Lok Nar Rim, who has quite a sizable little garrison, enough to certainly start taking some regions. And to the south is Khan Margos. Now, Khan Margos should be in that fort, but it's been moved and his coordinates haven't been updated. So he's supposed to start in that fort. I'll need to make note of that. I'm literally writing the word fort. Sorry. So Khan Margos in the south down there, with again the same early tier units. Now, Rhûn has been redesigned as a confederacy of tribes, and each tribe is represented primarily through a certain unit type or gathering of units. And Rhûn is, and you start as no different. You are the Daratai clan, and you start with Daratai warriors, crossbowmen, hunters, and clansmen. The four types of Daratai units. They are yours. That's what we're basing on. You're the Daratai, and you're setting out to claim and conquer all of Rhûn. Allow me to just move the book. Sorry, I've fiddled around with my microphone, by the way, in the attempt to try and stop all the peaks and crackles and whatnot from my previous setup, so that now I should be able to talk at a better level without it ever spiking. But it does mean that the microphone is now right next to my face, so it's taking me some getting used to, but I just thought I'd let you all know moving forward. So those are the armies. The custom generals then. Rukar starts with a bodyguard of Lok Nar Rim bodyguard. They are not custom. They are your standard bodyguard, but they are such a good unit that it is worthwhile him starting with them. Khan Margos, your faction heir, starts with Lok Nar Rim, and they are, of course, archers. Your best archers, and some damn fine archers, as we shall see. So you get one heavy halberd unit to start you off, the Lok Rim, and you get the Lok Nar as well, one heavy archer. So you've got a good starting army, setting you up for victory. Your family tree is relatively small and simple. Khan Rukar, or Lok Khan Rukar, and Marech have the son of Margos, daughter Tikkiz, and two sons due to come of age very soon, Uldor and Abdus. And then Margos himself has Mukalku, Marwan, Mufarij, and Matab, all to come of age as well. So you only have two people, but as a human player, you'll never die to regicide. If you do, please do let me know, because you're probably the first person that's ever done it. But the AI, it gives them enough that they can get a bit of a family going before you can kill them off. Victory conditions for Rhûn then in the long conditions are to hold 40 regions, including your capital, Karasant, Erebor, and Dale, and in defeat those factions, so Erebor, Dale, and Dorwinion. You need to claim the northeast. That is your charge, and you are set out to do that. Which means that is your charge. That's tautological. So the area you start in, there's no real physical defenses, except you can sort of usher people into a sort of funnel on the eastern side, because you've got the sea on your west and the edge of the map on the east. But you'll primarily be going up that way if you're not heading west, so it doesn't really matter too much. You have got the mountains of Dorwinion, which offer a little bit of defense, of course, primarily for Dorwinion, but equally for you if Dorwinion start getting a bit rowdy. You can block them here on the rivers. Away from that, though, Revanion is a vast open plain, and you must fight in the open. There's the odd tree here and there are hills dotted around, so you do get variety in your battle maps, but primarily it's a vast open wilderness, and it is for you to conquer. Rebels around you then, absolutely everyone. We'll talk more about that in the script because it is entirely intertwined with your gameplay as Rhûn. So moving on to custom battle maps, there aren't really any actually. This is a very custom battle map void area. The nearest custom settlement for you in version 4.5 is Kirig Gathol, which is all the way up here. Which means that your game will primarily, in terms of castles and city battles, will be you fighting in the Northman generic cities and castles that Dorwinion have and are littered around Revanion. If you head to the south, the nearest custom settlements are all the way over in Barad-dûr, where the Nazgûl currently reside, standing there waiting to be called to honor. So there's not very many customs. Mistrand itself is a huge city at the start of the game, or a city, sorry, so it can actually upgrade once. So you do get a large city there if anyone fights you in Mistrand, but if anyone's attacking you in Mistrand, then something's gone really badly. So you won't have very much custom battles, I'm afraid. Neighbours and diplomacy, you of course start right next to Dorwinion, Erebor a little further away to the north, and Dale further to the northwest than them. And to the south you've got Mordor and Khand, of course. And of those, you are allied to both of the latter, Mordor and Khand, and you're at war with Erebor. Now, you're not at war with Dale or Dorwinion, and note that Erebor are not allied to Dorwinion either. This is on purpose, so that you can, if you wish to, try and get a diplomatic relationship going with Dorwinion and ally with them. Get them on side, get them to turn against their allies. It's very difficult because, of course, they do start allied with Dale, but Dale are a non-entity for you at the start, as are Dorwinion. So you could ally with both, try and get them to turn on the dwarves. It's up to you. There's a bit of freedom. You're not forced to fight Dorwinion straight away. But do note, Dorwinion hate you, and they will try and attack you very early on, normally within the first 10 to 15 turns. So if you're going to try and get an alliance with Dorwinion, you've got to get a diplomat up very early. I believe you can train one. I don't know if Kargi is one. I think he's a spy. No, yes, he is, unfortunately. So you can train a diplomat straight away and possibly try and buy an alliance with Dorwinion if you want to. But it's a challenge, and it might make the game really, really easy if you take Dorwinion out, I'm afraid. So economy, buildings and whatnot, you are a nation who are men of the East. It's something that we haven't had to talk about yet, or possibly because I've just forgotten, which does mean you don't share a culture with Mordor. So if you take Mordor's lands, you won't get any of their culture, is of no use to you. You share the same culture as Khand, who are men of the East, and farther away, Harad, who are also men of the East. So the three of you are the three culture types, which does mean that no matter where you go, unless you turn on Khand, culture will be very important for you. So always be sure to spread your culture. Your culture comes from the Dark Shrine. Gives a culture increase bonus, as they all do, of 3%, population of 1, and a happiness bonus as well. And if we just look through the shrines, there they are. It starts as a sanctuary, which you've already got built. It goes up to a shrine, and then it's a dark temple at the top, which gives other bonuses as well. So be sure to try and spread your culture, because there's not much of it about. Otherwise, you're not restricted in any way. So you can get all the way to the top tier, which is a large city, and you can get all the way to the top of the castle, which is a stronghold. You do get an advanced blacksmith, and for you, of course, it is mostly going to be used in the Dwarven hold. So Kirriguthol, Erebor, possibly Thranduil's halls, you'll get it in places like that. But again, as ever, do check the changelog, which I think is actually in the description of all of these videos, where it does list where you get the advanced armorers. Outside of that, though, there's nothing really amazing with Rhûn. You do get the unique trading post building, which is really, really good. There is something, again, I think I've mentioned this before, but I'll go into it again. For some reason, there's some sort of hard-coded bonus to the building that in the base game is called the Caravanserai. It's a really, really powerful mercantile building, and we've renamed it to Trading Post, Trader Exchange, and Trading Plaza, but it gives a huge boost economically, way above what the normal marketplace offers. I don't know why, and I can't explain it, but it's a fantastic building, and it's well worth the 6,000 if you can get to the top. Do definitely try and build that. It gives you a lot of income. Aside from that, you're also one of the few nations that get the Merchant Guild. You only get up to the 2nd tier, but that gives you at least 1 merchant. So you will have 1 merchant to use as you wish. The other guild you get is the Warriors Guild, or in your case, the Dragonwrath and Master Dragonwrath's Guild, courtesy of Anno, the building icons there. Melee weapon bonus, Dragon's Wrath Guildman at the 2nd tier, and a morale bonus to troops trained here. But that's a global effect, so it's morale bonus to all your troops once you get the 2nd tier. No other really unique buildings to speak of for Rhûn. So that brings us roundly to your Diplomat. Your Diplomat trains, of course, out of the Tent of the Khan, and there is the Diplomat. The next nearest location is in Karasant, where you can't see it, but there's a building there that will give you a Diplomat as well. So you'd need to get Karasant if you want more than the 2 Diplomats allowed to you by the starting building. You are a nation that gets ships, but again, we're going to talk about that in a moment, and that actually brings us to that moment. So, Rhûn's gameplay effects. Let me just flip my page over because I've written it down. Rhûn is a confederacy of tribes, but you've got to get them on side. You've got to confederate with them, and rather than confederating, you're really crushing them and breaking their will. And you do that by capturing regions. So there are 5 aspects to the claiming of the clan's lands, and the first we'll start with are the Khandish units. So there are a couple of Khandish units that Rhûn get, but in order to train them, you need to capture and hold both Enmahath and Mataram. As soon as you own both of those regions, the Khandish troops are available to you. You can then lose those regions and it won't matter. As soon as you've captured both of them and you own both of them at one time, then the troops are available to you forever. So you can blitz them both and take those. Khandish units give you good ranged cavalry, which is something Rhûn don't really have. So they give you a good cavalry archer and they give you a good early tier foot archer as well. So they give you ranged options. The next option are the Arulad, who give you a fantastic early tier cavalry and an early tier armor piercing unit. And to get the Arulad on side, you need Elgar and Hrubar, Forest of Rhûn and Runic Hills reverse respectively. So those two regions will give you the Arulad. We'll see all of these units in a moment, of course. The next up are the Balchoth. They're the easiest to get. You only need Bura Monarchis. Once you have this region, then you get the 2, or is it 3 now? No, I think it's 2 Balchoth units, and again we'll see on the second half anyway. So once you've taken Bura Monarchis, you get the Balchoth. And lastly, or possibly the first you're actually likely to get, are boats. As I just mentioned, you do get boats, but you need to capture Lest first. So until you capture Lest, you can see there are no boats available. But I think we might be able to trick it into telling you which boats you get. No, because it's bound off by a script, so they never show until you get them. You don't get specifically good boats. You don't get good boats at all. Your boats are the same as Dorwinians, the same as Dales. They're the standard longboat. But you need Lest before you can build any ships. Lest are the seafaring clan, and you need them on side. You'll note that Mistran doesn't even start with a port, helping to hammer home the fact that Lest is the port region. It also gives you Adesh Marines as well, a fantastic firebomb throwing unit. So a very good one to take, but you'll note the garrison at the start is bloody massive, so it takes a while to take that. Generally speaking, Arulad or Khandish are the best ones to go for first, and then you can use the units that they give you to then spread out. Because, before we deal with the final benefit of this script, every time you get the requirements for one of those clans, an army will spawn at Mistrand with a general who has one of the new units you've just received, and a few units also that you've just unlocked. So you get a couple of units for free once you capture each of the regions required. Lastly, final confederation and the sort of unification of Rhûn requires the downfall of Dorwinion. Now, so you don't necessarily have to attack Dorwinion, but it does precludes you from getting your best unit. So in order to get the Chariots Chariot, which is a fantastic unit and confirms the sign of final unification of Rhûn, you need to take Karasant, Santanwi, and Strondost, and do all 4 previous requirements. So you'll need Ruba, Elgar, Lest, Bura Monarchis, Enmahath, Mataram, Strondost, Karasant, and Santanwi. Once you have all of those, doesn't matter what turn you do it on, but once you have all of those, the Chariots Chariots are available to you. I don't think you get a general with Chariots Chariots, but you get an army with some chariots in, but the general that spawns when you unify Rhûn, I don't think he has the chariots as his bodyguard. But I could be wrong, that's just a minor point. If he does, fantastic. If he doesn't, you get a couple of units anyway. Also, in version 4.5 script-wise, Rhûn have been given a Dragon Relic Hunt script by Rohan. And it is just a very simple and very interesting and engaging, but simple overall, sort of treasure hunt. And at certain points throughout the script, little messages will pop up and tell you what you need to do. It's related to the dragon cult, and you're basically running around looking for dragon artifacts. It will send you on a journey way up to the Withered Heath in its path, because that's of course where the last remaining dragons in the Third Age live, if there indeed are any there. It's rumor only. And it's just a minor little script. It gives you some ancillaries and some traits. It doesn't give you any units. It doesn't give you any sort of generals or anything. It just gives you some ancillaries and traits, and is a nice little extra addition of flavour to the campaign. But you can entirely ignore it, and you won't miss out on any major runic features, for example. So it's a fun script, and I recommend you do take part in it, but just in the sake of giving you all the information, if you don't complete that little dragon hunt, then all you will miss out on are some ancillaries and traits. Right, that concludes pretty much everything about Rhûn for version 4.5 then, so that turns us on to the difficulty, a much discussed point on all of these videos, because Gallo, quite rightly, I shouldn't talk about myself in the third person, because I, quite rightly, have not played as every faction, and my own bias obviously filters into these. But I think Rhûn is got to easily be a 1 or a 2, and I would lean to a 1. Your only real enemy is Dorwinion. And I know that Erebor are only a short way away, and Dale are only a short way away behind them, But Erebor will deal with Gundabad throughout almost the entire campaign. It will be their chief enemy, and they'll throw all of their weight into it. They do not bother or care about these backwater regions here, Gazarbarach and Erland's Ferry and Gazari Bar and Gazar Narkad. They're not too interested in them. You'll know even Skarn at the moment only has one unit in it. But we are only on turn 2. But the dwarves aren't interested in this area, and they basically leave it alone. So you have free reign to conquer all the way up to Rubar unhindered, and all the way down to Mataram and beyond if you wish to attack Khand, which you can do as well. You'll note that you don't have any diplomatic ties with Khand. Oh, no, sorry, you start allied. I'm thinking of Harad. Sorry, ignore that. There's a lot of rebel regions out here in Ravanian you can take. We're already at turn 2, so the auto-expansion's taken place, and you'll note Dorwinion expands to the north, primarily, leaving the west and the south entirely open for your command. Dorwinion is a powerful enemy, and they do sort of outclass you in the early game, but you outclass them in the later game, arguably. And well, actually, you're very evenly balanced in terms of your armies, but you're a human player. They are the AI. You can beat Dorwinion. It is not beyond the realms of possibility, and in fact, it is entirely expected and is quite easy to do. So once Dorwinion falls, the campaign becomes an absolute doddle. There just aren't any other enemies in this area that we can give you. So if you play the campaign normally, it's definitely a 1. You might hit the odd speed bump defeating Dorwinion, but you will defeat them. Once you've then broken through and you're dealing with Dale will be dealing with Dol Guldur, so they won't throw their full attention onto you because they'll be throwing their attention into the forest. Dale don't tend to really stretch that far down the eastern side. Now, you probably will come into contact with Dale, but not the full might of Dale. The full might of Dale goes for Dol Guldur. So I feel confident saying it's a 1. Some people might struggle, but some people struggle with the easiest factions, like the absolute easiest factions, like the High Elves. But overall, taking all things into consideration, Rhûn really should be a 1, and I feel it is. So that is the difficulty rating I'm giving it. So, we shall now jump over to the battle map and look at the roster there, and hopefully, unlike last week, I won't forget any units such as the King's Shields, which I completely forgot to talk about in last week's faction overview. But this time, hopefully I've not forgotten anyone, and we'll see what the battle map looks like for Rhûn. Welcome then to Rhûn's battle map and the list of all the units. Now I've made sure every unit is present, and this time I'll make sure to actually talk about every single one. I can't believe that's happened twice in this go through. But anyway, as you will see from the screen, Rhûn is a balanced roster, very well balanced roster indeed. You've got 4 options in range, you've got plenty of cavalry, one of which is also range, provided you capture the regions, and you've got a lot of good heavy infantry. You do lack, possibly in the very, very late game, you do get 2 very good late game units, as we shall see, Dragon's Wrath and Lok Sion, but the units before aren't actually as powerful as a lot of people do think they are, myself included. So they possibly lack in the absolute ultimate elite tier, which is quite accurate. Rhûn is not an all-powerful, mighty warrior nation. They are a nation that has always relied on very specific tactics. The Wain Riders used wains or wagons to dominate, and then they were beaten back. The Balkoth used sort of numbers to dominate, and then again they were beaten back. Rhûn has never really excelled as an absolutely fantastic warrior nation, and they've always really just been an upstart nation under the heel of Gondor, who every now and then manage to enact some sort of vengeance, but always tend to lose. And it's reflected a bit in their roster by the fact they don't have really any late game massive punching power. They do get good late game units, but only a few of them. But dealing with the starting units then, this is where the Daratai come in. So the first units you're going to use are all the Daratai, and we'll deal with those first, even though they are spread out amongst a few tiers. Chief and first amongst them are the Clansmen. Clansmen have an attack of 4 and a defense of 6. They're not very good. They're slightly better than Orcs. They are on sort of Mordor's early tier unit kind of likening. They don't have as good militia as nations like Erebor is ever going to throw at you, of course, or the Elves if you made it over to them. They're not very good early tier. They're just a very standard sword and board unit. No real benefits to speak of. Poor morale response, no movement speed benefit. And then the only thing, though, is that Rhûn don't really have any negatives, except they don't like fighting in the winter. So do watch out for that, because obviously the winter comes around once every 4 turns. So you're slightly worse in the winter throughout your entire faction. Supporting the Daratai Clansmen, this is where I am going to do this based on when the units come to you, so that it might be a bit sort of choppy and jumps around a little more than it perhaps does with other videos, but it's worthwhile mentioning the units in groups. So supporting the Daratai clansmen are the crossbowmen and the hunters. So the crossbowmen have a 3 melee attack and a 6 defense, so they're slightly worse than the clansmen in melee, but of course they do have a crossbow, but with only 6 missile attack. So they're a very early tier entry level crossbow unit. Now they look fantastic, very good quality units. They're courtesy of Third Age Total War. Average morale response, 26 missiles and 140 on the range. Only average accuracy, watch out for that. Relatively cheap though for a crossbow unit. Crossbows of course always have a role to play. They always have a benefit and they always have a worth if you like using them. Personally I don't. I hate crossbows and I'd always use the hunters, but you have the option there. Daratai hunters are good early tier archers because they're relatively cheap, but they do only get 2 missile attack, watch out for that. They're only slightly better than orc early tier archers, but as we've always mentioned on this channel, or I've always mentioned on the channel, when there's 177 of them, even doing 2 missile damage will still do something in the early game. They will not get a single kill against late game units. I mean, you might get lucky with the odd 1 or 2 kills, but at the early stages of the game, when you're fighting against Dorwinians, Vineyard Levies, and Thorn units, these guys will get kills. So do use them. And they are relatively cheap, although it doesn't show because they're a mercenary unit, but they are relatively cheap. The last unit of the Daratai is a sort of second tier unit, and they are the warriors. Daratai warriors have this sort of double blade thing, which is very cool, but it is represented as a shield. So the double blade, we've allowed them to sort of use it as a shield stat. They get a little bonus there. Their attack is 7 and their defense is 10. They're not armor piercing or anything like that. They're just a much better version of the Daratai clansmen, except they have a worse shield stat. But overall, everything else is better. So definitely use these where you can. The clansmen, unfortunately, again, it varies, but they're very, very cheap, and the warriors are only slightly more expensive. You should always train the warriors first, and then if you still have money, then get the clansmen. The warriors are just better. So the next units in the early tier are the Balkoth, and these are likely to be some of the first units that you might fully bring into the Confederacy. The Balkoth come from Burr and Arrakis, and they give 2 options. I did think it was 2. And the first is the Tribesmen, a Javelin unit. So a melee attack of 3 and a defense of 5 makes them the worst melee unit other than the Hunters in your roster. But they have a 7 missile damage Javelin. They throw 3 of them over 55 meters with an average accuracy. You'll note, though, that the morale at the moment for many of these early units is quite poor. So you're not going to be fighting to the death with anything like this. And Balkoth are notorious for throwing their javelins and then running away, in my experience. But a javelin unit always has a place in an army, and they're quite cheap. Although, again, unfortunately, it's mercenary, so I can't show you. They're quite cheap, so quite a useful unit to add. But a better version of them, and the first really dedicated anti-cavalry unit you will get, are the Balkoth Spearmen. They are, of course, spearmen. They've got a bit of a Brazilian flag theme vibe to some of their shields. And they have an attack of 3 and a defense of 13. They can shield trim, but not shield wall. But they are the first unit that will really hold off the cavalry that will be charging against you. Dorwinion doesn't have loads of cavalry, and of course I will base this entire overview on the fact that you will almost certainly fight Dorwinion. It's very rare that you don't. And Dorwinion doesn't get loads of cavalry, but they do get a couple of early tier Thorn cavalry units that you will have to watch out for. And the Balkoth Spearmen can counter those quite nicely. No movement speed bonuses. Were a very sort of normal or average, or the median. The median is not the word. We're kind of the normal is probably the best word. Human nation. So we haven't got the strength of the Númenóreans. We haven't got the numbers of the wild men. We are the middle ground. And so there's no real benefits down here. The high defense is very good for the spear unit, and their attack, as most spear units do, have a lower attack because it's not about killing the enemy, it's just about holding them in place to get something else to kill the enemy, which we shall see now with either the Candish or Arulad contribution. So we'll start with the Arulad because they're likely to generally speaking, I think they do come before the Candish units in the conquests. So the Arulad ground unit are the Dragon Guard, and they are your first armor-piercing unit, even though what they're wielding is not really all that armor-piercing-y, but they've always been AP, and we like them to be. They look absolutely fantastic, really crisp quality-looking unit. 5 attack isn't fantastic for an early tier armor piercing. Berserkers and Marauders of the Wildmen nations tend to have 7, 8 or 9 attack, but still, a 5 attack that's armor piercing is nothing to be scoffed at. Their defense is 11, but note they don't have a shield, so their archer defense is only 6. so watch out for enemy arrow fire. Good morale response. Otherwise, they're just a very good early tier shock infantry unit, and they are that. Consider them a two-handed axe-wielding unit, really. They just have this sort of glaive thing. But do watch out that whilst they have good morale, and they do have an 11 defense, but after they've charged in, they do actually tend to die quite quickly, so do try and cycle charge with them. And speaking of cycle charging, then we come onto the cavalry, and the other Arulad option are the Dragon Riders, your first dedicated cavalry unit, and the one you'll be using for most of the game, because the only other dedicated cav are really late game. So Arulad Dragon Riders are your primary cavalry for a long time. They have a 5 attack and a 6 charge, which isn't fantastic, and a defense of 11. So whilst they are your main cavalry, and they will do well in the charge, a 6 charge is nothing to scoff at. They're not amazing. They won't turn the tide. They won't take down Spearmen in a head-on charge like late-game cavalry can. So you do need to be careful with them. You'll need to micro them a little bit. They're not amazing. But they do look really nice, and that always boosts them up in my book. Again, I can't show you the cost because they are a unit that's available to the Northern Dunedain in the Beacon of Hope system, and thus they are mercenaries. The other option for cavalry are canned, of course, and canned give you archers. So we'll start with the cavalry, though, because we're over here. So the Candish Raiders. Now these, as we've already mentioned, you need Mataram and you need Enmahath, which are both regions to your south. The Candish Raiders are just good early-tier cavalry archers, a very good early-tier cavalry archer that in my Dol Amroth campaign is giving me real hell as canned, fighting against canned, I should say. Skilled against mounts, so they're an anti-cavalry cavalry. They can form the Cantabrian Circle, which is always a pain in the arse to shoot down. They have 120% movement speed buff as well, so they will outrun almost any cavalry that tries to chase them down. 32 missiles, 130 meter range, and high accuracy. They are really good cavalry archers, and I cannot stress that enough. They're also quite cheap, and they come in very early doors, so a really, really powerful unit you should be using if you can. Do note, though, the one drawback is they're useless in melee. The melee attack is only 4, their charge bonus is 3, which is pathetic for a cavalry unit, and their defense is only 8. So they will die if you get them in combat, in melee. They are primarily and should always be used as cavalry archers first and foremost. And once they've finished with that, keep them on the edges and only run them in if a unit is about to break. Supporting them are their dismounted variants known as Candish Hunters. They are much better archers than the unit before them, with a 4 melee, 3 missile, and 8 defense compared to the 2, 2, and 2 of the Daratai Hunters. They are considerably better than the Hunters. Their recruitment cost is also very, very cheap. No, they are more expensive than the Hunters, but they're still very cheap. A very, very good early tier archer, and one you should absolutely try and use if you can. There are 20 less of them than the Hunters, so there's always that to watch out for. But still, with a cost of 540, their upkeep will be about 250, something like that. They're a really good unit, and you should definitely use them. 24 missiles, 170 on the range, and average accuracy makes them slightly better across the board than the Hunters. They are just infinitely better than the Hunters, and they don't cost that much more, so definitely use these if you can. Taking can should be a priority if you like arrow fire. Right, that moves us on then to the next unlockable unit, and the last unlockable unit, actually, because everything else other than the Suryut Chariots is available to you no matter what. So, and they are the Adesh Marines that come from Lest. Now, stat-wise, they're not actually fantastic. A melee attack of 9 and a defense of 13 only puts them slightly higher than the Daratai Warriors. But, of course, they throw a firebomb that does 9 damage, knocks people down, and causes morale damage as well. Now, they are your first AOR unit. Something I should have already mentioned is that the units that you unlock from the various regions are not restricted to those regions. They might be restricted to certain regions. The Candish ones used to be, but they aren't anymore by the looks of it, no. So all the units that you unlock, once you've unlocked them, they're available everywhere. You just have to unlock them first. The Adesh Marines, however, are only a coastal unit, so you'll only get these around the Sea of Rhûn, so they're relatively limited. They get a bonus against cavalry, because cavalry doesn't like fire bombs. They are effective against armor with all their weapons, I think, actually. There's the bomb and the weapon on their back. No, I think it's just the bombs only. Their primary weapon, the game thinks, is the bomb, and it only lists the primary weapon stats here. Their secondary weapon, I think, is a two-handed sword. Yes, because they have no shield. Yes, so armor-piercing bombs, which are absolutely fantastic and burn their targets. 4 missiles that they can throw with those, 60-meter range and average accuracy. And then when they finish with those, they're just a better-than-average sort of two-handed sword unit. So a shock infantry after they finish with the bombs. They're a watered-down Nazkai, really. They're relatively expensive, though. I think it's up about 800, 900, something like that. And they only come from the coast. And you need lest in order to train them. Once you've captured it, though, you can lose it. You'll still be able to train them. It's not like a high elf situation. Right, so that brings us on then to your dedicators. But before we talk about that, there is a mercenary unit that I wanted to talk about with Rune, because they come from Rune. Mercenaries have finally been fixed in version 5 and are now actually available almost all over much of the world, whereas there was a bug that we were completely unaware of, and someone called Hooded Horse very kindly brought the bug to our attention and provided a fix for it, which we had to tinker with anyway, but him bringing the fix to our attention is much appreciated. So mercenaries have been bugged since DAC was founded, but they are now fixed, and mercenaries will be far more common, and one such mercenary are the Far Rhûn mercenaries. They come from regions that border Rhûn, and they come from most of Eastern Rhûn, actually, or most of Rhûn, so they're quite a common unit if you do get over there. In version 5, where they actually work properly. In version 4.5, the mercenaries are just totally broken and disregard them. But in 5, they work well. They're skilled against mounts. They are a halberdier unit that doesn't get a armor-piercing bonus, though. So their attack of 12, so think of them more as two-handed spears, really. Attack of 12, defense of 16 is a fantastic stats for a spear unit. Not only that, but they look absolutely fantastic. They're a unit that much of the Candish roster used to look very similar to this, and the unit model was really high quality, but it felt a little out of place, and Hummingbird repurposed it as the Far Rhûn Mercs, and they look amazing, don't they? They're mercenary units, so I can't tell you how much they cost, because I don't even know off the top of my head. Good morale response. They don't like Baron, but they do like everything else. There are a few Baron regions around Rhûn, so they are affected by that. You can check those in the green books. They're a really good anti-cavalry unit, basically. Always, if you can, use them against any type of mount. It doesn't list it there, which is interesting. I think that's just because we've forgotten to write it in. But they are, of course, an anti-cavalry unit, absolutely, first and foremost. Speaking of anti-cavalry units, you get another really good dedicated one now. You get the Lok Nar Rim. Lok Nar Rim are halberdiers. Again, not effective. Oh, no, they're pikes, sorry. Excuse me, they're dedicated pikes. 4 attack, very, very low, but they are pikes. Triple it, it's about 12. Defense of 15, which is good for a mid-tier pike. They are actually a really good unit, and one you should definitely try and get very often. Do note they have a shield on their back, but that does not apply for shield stats. You have to actually have it in your hand, so they have no shield stat. But their armor makes up 2/3 of their total defense, which gives them excellent archer protection as well. A very, very good unit, and for the cost of 860, definitely get them out. Pikes are so powerful in Medieval 2. I cannot stress that enough. Get as many as you can. And Lok Nar Rim are a really good mid to late game unit. You should definitely use them if you can. Supporting them while they act as the anvil are the Lok Rim. Now, Lok Rim, I think... No, I'm thinking of the Scion Rim. Lok Rim are an axe and shield armor-piercing unit. 6 attack, 17 defense, but a relatively poor charge. Now, the charge bonuses are being addressed across the board for version 5. We will go through every faction and align. We will decide on where we want charge bonuses to be and apply those across the whole board. That's my plan. I'll draw up a spreadsheet. I do like a spreadsheet. So don't worry too much about the charge at the moment, but it's low for version 4.5. So they're not fantastic on the charge, but they are the aggressive unit compared to the pikes. They're the ones that you want to flank around the side, get a little bit of a bonus from the charge, but primarily kill the enemy with that armor-piercing attack. Total defense of 17 allows them to survive long enough, and a good shield and armor stat means that they are very protected against arrow fire. They won't fall to arrows very easily, not at all. And lastly, we come to the Lok Nar Rim of this tier. Lok Nar Rim are one of the few units in the game, in fact, one of only 2 units in the game, that, as many of you will know, are blessed with the ability to fire arrows. Fire arrows were turned off in Divide and Conquer because they completely nerfed the AI. The AI would almost always use fire arrows, and the fire arrow was inherently lower accuracy, slower to fire, and lower damage, but with the ability to set people on fire, which didn't happen very often, so it would often be a huge nerf to the enemy. The AI did not know how to turn fire arrows off. It could only ever, if they were turned on, they would be on for the whole battle, so it was always nerfing itself. So we cut fire arrows. That, on top of the fact that they are wholly unrealistic, and I don't know why they feature in historical games, because they just were not used. Look at literally any historical YouTube channel or any documentary. Fire arrows are not a thing apart from very niche circumstances. And so the fire arrows were turned off. But what we did instead is use the fantasy element of Rhûn and their worship of the dragon cult to give them a buffed up archer and fire arrow. So the Lok Nar Rim fire an arrow that is better than the standard arrow and also has the ability to set people on fire. So it's a really good weapon. You should use it. And it lists there, as you say, flaming arrows, they burn the targets. So it does its standard 5 missile damage. It's highly accurate. It's got 180 meters, 30 missiles they can fire. They're not slowed down in how they in their rate of fire because they use fire arrows, and they get all the benefits of the fire arrows with none of the drawbacks. They only cost 830. The defense is 14 and the melee is 5, so they'll be all right if they get hit in melee. But as with any archer, always try and keep them out until you've used every arrow. That goes without saying. But if they do get into combat, they can at least hold their own. They're a really good unit, and your second in command, your Khan Margos, he starts with these. So you get a unit of them from the game start to play with, which is always good fun. They also mark the last of your dedicated ground archers, so you don't get a sort of uber tier archer, but you do get the uber Chariots, which we'll come to in a moment. But that's all 4 units, and now we come on to the 4 units of the uber tier, and we shall start with the Lok Nar Rim. Now this is the unit that was added in version 3, I think, to give Rune a bit more punch at this late tier, because previously they only had the Dragonwrath's Guildmen. Lok Nar Rim are a very heavy late-game anti-cavalry unit. They are Spearmen. You'll note that they can use sharpened stakes. They are your stake-producing unit if you do want to use stakes. Every faction normally gets 1. Their attack is 8, which is really good for a spear unit. Like, that's really good for a spear unit. And the defense of 28 is getting up there with one of the best defenses in the game. Only dwarves and high elves really go above 30 in terms of total defense, and even then it's only their very best unit. So that's a fantastic defensive stat. Really, really good defensive unit. But that's all there is to say about them, really. They're a costly but very good defensive unit. They still, even though they're late game, will not get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kills unless they're fighting trash, but they will hold the line like a rock wall against the ocean for countless years, and you can use them well as the anvil to both the guildsmen and the Innis Rim, as we shall see. So the Dragonwrath's guildmen are a late game shock infantry. Now they're not armor piercing, but they do frighten the enemy, and they have an attack of 13, which is really high for a ground unit. 23 total defense means they'll survive as well. They don't have a shield though, so watch out for flank attacks and arrow fire, but they only come from your Heartland region. So Runic Heartlands is many regions, so we can't really define it. But basically, all of the regions that I listed that you need to capture to get the Chariots are places you can get the guildsmen. So it's just in and around the Sea of Rhûn, really, or the southeast edge of the Sea of Rhûn. They're a very good shock infantry, but again, they're costly. They have a higher charge of 6, which is nice, and the attack of 13 is what really pulls them through. And the fact that they frighten the enemy really makes them stand out. But the proper, of course, hammer to the anvil of Rhûn are the Lok Nar Rim, one of the finest cavalry units in the game, and I think they were in the top 10, but I can't remember where they came. They are very late game and they are very expensive, but they're a really good cavalry unit. They inspire your forces, an attack of 10, a charge of 13. That's a really high charge stat. Defense of 24 means they'll survive once they're in battle. They are just really, really good. Very good morale response. They're slightly slower than other cavalry because they're weighed down with all this gold armor. Their secondary attack is 9 when they finish their charge, so their secondary attack is almost as good as their primary. So if you are going to keep them in melee, they will do well. They don't like forests or snow, but all cavalry doesn't like forests because horses don't like running in forests, and so they don't fight as well there. Do note, Lok Nar Rim do have one significant weakness, which Dorwinian actually is a strength of Dorwinians, and that is crossbowmen. Lok Nar Rim are slow, they have a large hitbox, they are very susceptible to armor piercing, and crossbows are very good against anything that is slow, has a large hitbox, and is susceptible to armor piercing. So Lok Nar Rim really do not want to charge into crossbows. It is their worst nightmare, and they will die in droves. And so do watch out. If Dorwinian choose the human route, which in version 5 you are actually then told which route Dorwinian has chosen, whereas in older versions we didn't include that for some reason. But in version 5 that's been added. So if Dorwinian chooses the human route, then you really do need to watch out because they get a very good late game crossbow unit, which is really good. And it will slaughter your Lok Nar Rim if you don't watch out. So it's just something to note. And lastly, full unification of Rhûn will give you the Chariots Chariots. Chariots Chariots are good archers primarily. So as archers, they are Lok Nar Rim on a chariot. They have the same flaming arrow. It isn't armor piercing, but it is flaming arrow. They do 9 missile attack with their arrow, whereas the Lok Nar only do 5. But do note there's hardly any of these. So there's 2 archers per chariot, and there's, about 10 chariots there? 4 across the front, 4 and 9. So there's 9. So there's only 18 archers, which is not very many, but there's 9 missile attack, and it sets people on fire. They inspire your troops. They get a bonus against cavalry. They frighten the enemy, and when they do charge in themselves, their melee attack is armor piercing. Now, chariots are very, in my opinion, hard to use because I'm not a good cavalry commander. I don't like using chariots. I just tend to end up getting them killed. I know the theory of how to use a chariot, but in practice I forget about them and they end up dying. Primarily, you want to use them as archers first and foremost, but if you have to get them in melee, you use them to disrupt the enemy line, not fight the enemy. So the purpose of chariots is to run through the enemy, knocking them all over and making them susceptible to your backup unit, which is coming in to charge into them. The chariots themselves should not be used in melee unless at the utmost end of need, because they will die. They have a massive hitbox. It is like 3 horses long almost and about 3 horses wide. It is a huge hitbox and they suffer wildly for that. Anything that throws anything at them, anything that shoots at them, and particularly anything that throws rocks or large ballista bolts at them will kill them in seconds. Siege is really effective against chariots. Archers, less so, but still effective. But the best thing to kill chariots with are javelins, because javelins do a lot of damage but are normally quite inaccurate. But against such a large hitbox, the chariots just... I can't even think of a word to explain how easily chariots die to javelin fire. Even early tier trash javelins like Balkoth will still do a lot of damage against these guys. Do you know they do have 3 hit points, so we give them as much help as we can, but they really do die really easily if you don't use them well. And it takes a bit of practice to get used to how to use them. So that concludes the main roster. That only leaves you with the Bodyguard, and the Bodyguard are Lok Rim Bodyguard, as we've mentioned already, because your faction leader has these. They are halberdiers, so armor piercing, they frighten the enemy, they get a bonus against mounts, they have an attack of 11, a charge of 5 as well, which is fantastic and shouldn't be that high, and a defense of 22. A really good unit. They're one of the better General's Bodyguard units that the game has. Of course, they used to be mounted Rune, but we've tried to take away all mounted bodyguards apart from the nations that absolutely must have them or we feel really should have them. And Rune are not one such nation, so we took them away, and they're now a really powerful armor-piercing halberdier. And they are really powerful. They're a fantastic unit. So if you can use them well, if you can flank with them or hold a line with them, they'll do really, really well. The jury's out, I think, on whether or not Dorwinian's dismounted two-handed bodyguard unit is better than yours. I think in a one-on-one fight, Rune's bodyguard would win against Dorwinian's, but I think I've seen some people say that Dorwinian's is actually better. I haven't tested it myself, so I don't know. But Dorwinian's bodyguard will be your main enemy bodyguard for some time. Very good morale and good morale response. You will have noted as we've gone through, not a single unit in the Runic roster has exceptional morale. You are not a high up there, massive morale nation. The best morale that we've seen is on the Innas Rim and the Chariots, who have very good and excellent in reverse respective order. So they actually have your best morale of any unit, and it's only excellent. I say only excellent. Excellent is good, but it is still only excellent. There is a tier above it that it could well be. Put those all into one group and add them. There we are. And we'll turn all of that off. Get rid of that one, and 7 that one as well, and we play the game. So there we are, that is Rune. So then we come to who are we fighting next week as our armies align. Let me just speed it up for a moment while the armies get into position and we actually get some fighting. From this far away, you can see there's a lot of cavalry options out on the field here today. There's some, the AI always brings siege when you do the autofill thing. But there's a lot of cavalry, but the lines are meeting down the middle. The AI constantly trying to flank itself. It's basically one big dance watching the AI fight the AI. It's really bizarre. They spend more time trying to flank each other than they do actually thinking about where to attack with their units. And it's so easy to cheese if you know what you're up to. But there was a lot of cavalry on the field, but actually there was quite a lot of infantry. There's some green banners waving high in the sky there. There's some human-controlled chariots, siege equipment below us. A lot of browns and greens on show in the roster. I think that probably is enough of a giveaway by now that it is the Kingdom of Rohan. And they will get decimated by our infantry, I have absolutely no doubt. Rohan has had a few touches here and there that we've given them a bit of love, but Rohan is one of the factions we would just consider done. There's very little that needs to be done to them. They have a very interesting early game fight against Isengard, which we have improved in version 5, or soon will do. Rohan is going to implement a script regarding the Marshals of the Mark, and make Rohan's early campaign just a bit harder. With a unique script focusing around the two main marshals of Rohan at the time, who are of course Eomer and Theodred. They're going to feature prominently at the start of the campaign, and Theoden is going to take a back seat. But otherwise, their roster is very, very much done. They've got a few archer units, but they're not an archer primary nation. But their Helmingus, this unit, is quite good, as we will see. So they've got a good archer option, but they're not an archer heavy nation. And they've got a shed load of cavalry. An absolute shed load of cavalry. You have a cavalry for every occasion. And of course, the Royal Guard are also one of the better cavalry units in the game. They featured in the top 10. Alright, they're not the best cavalry unit in the game, but they shouldn't be. Rohan is a nation of cavalrymen, but they are a nation of light and fast cavalrymen. They're not cataphract cavalry, not in any way. And in Medieval 2, cataphract cavalry often is king. So that's why they didn't top the top 10 cavalry. But they're a good nation nevertheless, and if you like cavalry, they're your thing. Ah, no, Captain Tugor has died. Our army will almost certainly fall away to nothing now, as a unit of ours is routing. But there we are. Oh, look at the Faerûn mercs. Their shield, they just look so nice. This is why I'm so pleased that we've now finally got mercenaries working, because there's so many good mercenary units. Well, there's only a few, really, actually. But there's mercenary units, and previously they've just not been used, and the Faerûn ones are fantastic. And also, if Lord of Links has his way, he's been constantly requesting that we make a Far-Harad version, so that there's mercenaries representing the sort of outer reaches of the map that we don't see, and I'm sure we'll probably relent and add in a Far-Harad merc as well. But for now, that is the end of this episode. So thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. I do hope that the sound level has been alright with the microphone, and hopefully sounds a little bit better. It has done in my testing, and I'm happy with it, but do let me know your thoughts. I haven't changed the microphone, I've just changed the way it records, and hopefully that's improved it massively. But for now, and until we speak again, do note that the DCI content, the first release of the DCI content went up yesterday. Well, it actually went up about 45 minutes ago for me, but for when you're seeing this video, it went up yesterday. If you're interested in DCI Last Alliance and the Second Age of Middle-earth, then do check out the overview video. Have a feel if you think you'd like to play it, and then you can download and play it. And also, I've started a campaign as Rovanian, which is rather fitting because their chief enemy is Rhûn, so it all rather came together quite nicely. Although the Rune that is present in DCI Last Alliance looks drastically different to the Rune that we've just looked at, so do watch out for that. But until we speak again, dear friends, Navair Naden Pedamad Melonin, and farewell.